Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's day is going well. My name is Caitlin Edwards, and I'm the Community Events Manager at Linux Professional Institute. Thanks for joining us today for today's webinar, Summer of Code, Creating Successes and Opportunities. For those of you who are new with Linux Professional Institute, we are the global certification standard and career support organization for open source professionals. With more than 180,000 certification holders, we are the world's first and largest vendor-neutral Linux and open source certification body. We have certified professionals in over 180 countries, deliver exams in multiple languages, and have hundreds of training partners. During the webinar, please type your questions, any comments, any successes that you can also want to share into the chat or the Q&A box that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. I'll keep track throughout the webinar, and then we'll facilitate a Q&A session once the presentation has taken place. We will record and provide the recording, the slides, and all resources in a follow-up email later this week. Today, we are thrilled to have Jessica Green as our presenter. Having explored careers as a camera assistant in film and television, and as a specialty coffee roaster for a renowned European micro roastery, Jessica made the decision to retrain in 2017 and add program to her skill set. After completing Rails Girls Summer of Code scholarship in 2018, she joined the team at Ecosia to use her new skills and help plant trees. As a self-taught, community-taught developer, she is thankful to the local tech communities who have supported her in making the move to IT. She organizes events to support other women and gender minorities in making the move into tech. So welcome, Jessica, and I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Caitlin, and thank you to the Linux Professional Institute for providing this opportunity to share a few of my thoughts with you all. As Caitlin said, I'm really also interested to hear back anybody else's experiences, ideas, or programs that you may have put in place, because I have a small agenda here, which is I would really like to see more programs like the ones that I've participated in. So we'll just get that out of the way straight away. You can find me online, normally everywhere as Sleepy Pioneer. It's down in the bottom of my slides, so on Twitter, on GitHub. And yeah, with that, I'm going to kick off. So I think, Caitlin, you did a great job of introducing me. So there's a little bit of repetition here, unfortunately. But as Caitlin mentioned, I consider myself a community/self-taught developer. That being because without the support of the local tech community here, and in fact, actually the global tech community, I don't think I would have been able to persevere as much as I have and had the successes which I have had, having that network and that community to be able to talk with, share ideas with, share the successes, but also share the hard moments with, has been integral for me for this journey into tech. I am a career changer twice, so that was still scary the second time, if I'm being honest, but this experience has been really exciting and nerve-wracking. I think it's very interesting in the time period that we live, that it's a possibility, and I think it's, for me, it's always about gaining more knowledge and meeting new people. As she mentioned, I also took part in this Summer of Code by Rails Girls in 2018, and this was working in open source on the open source project Nextcloud. This was a fantastic opportunity to put into practice a little bit of the programming that I had been doing before that. Before that, it had been mainly online courses, and I had joined many of the community groups such as PyLadies and Women Who Go to kind of learn in a communal setting. But I think this collaborative work that we did during the Rails Girls Summer of Code really set me up to be able to then move on and get my internship position at Ecosia in 2018. And that's actually where I presently am working as a software engineer with a back-end focus. So the crux of what I kind of want to talk about today is that we're in an industry that is growing, that has a lot more jobs and is becoming to the point where we just need more people with this skill set because of the rate of growth. And it's also an industry that is fairly new, like fairly young industry. But I think we also kind of start to see it be open to a lot more kinds of people with different backgrounds. And there's therefore many paths to becoming a developer. And I'm sure everyone here also has their own story to share. And please feel free to add it in the chat as well. Interestingly, only 67% of developers are saying they have a computer science degree. This is from the HackerRank skills report. And 74% are saying they're at least partially self-taught, which means that we see in this industry a great value in some sort of self-initiated learning and a necessity indeed. And I think this also comes from the fact that it is an industry where the technology is always changing, the skill sets are always adapting. So you kind of somewhat have to be open and willing to self-educate. We're also seeing a big growth in boot camps, and this market grew over 4% in 2019. And this is definitely an alternative way to maybe doing a computer science degree where you get a very intense, in a short period of time, learning experience, which kind of sets you up ready to start in the industry. But I would say no matter which one of these paths you're taking, or alternatively, you maybe take a path similar to mine where you do mainly isolated self-learning, you're still going to get to the point where you need to find your first job. And this is a really difficult point. And I mean, particularly in the current situation that we find ourselves, maybe even more so. First of all, there's just very few junior positions posted. There's so many tech jobs posted that we look for that are like senior or mid to senior. But the amount of junior positions out there is very few. Often, even on these junior positions, the skills listed include a computer science degree, which, as we've just discussed, not everybody is possessing, or they want years of experience, even for what is supposed to be an entry-level job. Many people who are like approaching this, particularly if they're a career changer, don't actually know what's required to be a developer. Because while a lot of these online courses will teach us the syntax and how to build our own programs, they very rarely talk about a lot of the important skills around that of like problem solving, breaking down problems, and also communication, things that we would traditionally put in the soft skills bracket or transferable skills bracket. And then even knowing what each role entails. I see this a lot, for instance, in data science. Seems to be an umbrella term that can actually mean a multitude of different positions. And it's very unclear exactly what's required for each role. And lastly, there's just a lot of conflicting advice. So it's very difficult to get started. There's people that say, don't even apply for a job until you have a year's coding under your belt. Or there's people that will say, I got my first job after 5 months. And it's really hard to like navigate this and place yourself. It's also incredibly stressful because you often look and see the progression of others and feel that you are somehow failing if you have not managed to get there at that point. By the way, if that's you in the audience, you are not failing. This is not a true comment. It's just I understand that that could be the feeling that you may have. It is very tough to get that first position. So this concept of work experience is actually not a new idea at all. This is a report that's actually around graduates in the UK from many different kind of industries. But the fact that with work experience, they're 3 times more likely to secure jobs is an indicator to me that we perhaps need to maybe think more about what are entry-level positions. And if it's not junior level engineers, what is there in the industry to provide that level of experience required to get a junior job? For me, this was Rails Girls Summer of Code. This is a program that's been running for since 2013, and I was actually one of the last cohorts in 2018. Very sadly, we just found out that this program has been discontinued due to a lack of resources. And I think that makes having this discussion today even more poignant, because I'd really like to see, as I said at the start, more of these programs being supported in the future. Rails Skills alone has supported 205 students worldwide. And what they offer is a 3-month paid scholarship where the teams work on open source. They're provided with mentors, and they work with a coaching company who provide a safe space for the teams to work in, but also probably likely some of the mentors, and give them an insight into what day-to-day developer life is. For me, this was just such an eye-opener to see exactly what development work required. And also coming from 2 jobs that were mainly standing on my feet to coming to an industry where I mainly sat on my bum was a big difference. So it gave me a taste of whether I really wanted to do this or not. Of course, I have decided I would like to. What you do here is you work in a team. Team Ruby Cats was not my team, I have to say, but their illustration was incredibly adorable. I worked with an amazing woman called Artie, and we worked together on this project called Nextcloud. Our day-to-day would be meeting with a coach, doing a small stand-up, so sharing a check-in of where we were, how we were progressing, if we had anything that was blocking our progress. And then we would sit down and pair code together. Pair programming, I think, is still one of the most difficult things that I face in my life as a developer, because it has so many kind of different thoughts around it. Many engineers are not really comfortable with it, and to a certain extent, it means that you have to be vulnerable. So doing this off the bat with someone I did not know RT beforehand was quite nerve-wracking, but it was also really exciting to be able to work through problems together. And once we started to open up to each other and say, well, I don't know what this is, and I don't know either, we suddenly became much more active in being able to solve problems together. And I think this was a really important process. Often when you're in a position, like in a job position, you don't have that level of comfort or confidence to be able to make it about the learning experience, but an entry-level job should be about this. It should be about this exposure to what the job entails and that excitement of being able to explore what you're doing. This is a program that I'm currently setting up, or have just started, which is a Code Year Summer of Code. So with the sad closure of Rails Skills Summer of Code, there were some participants that had applied this year, and I was hoping to be a coach for them, and a coach was planning to be their coaching company. Of course, mixed with the pandemic, this has ended up being a very, very different program. It's a light program, it's 6 weeks. The students are only committed to 10 hours or more if they want per week, so that they also are able to keep their other commitments such as childcare or other jobs. They're working on their own projects, which is a little bit different to working on an open source project that's already established. And what we're offering is open door sessions from coaches where they are available online to have questions asked, and the students can have calls, maybe share what they're working on, do a pair programming session, or just touch base. We're also offering on top of that knowledge sharing sessions. These are about an hour long and go in depth on one topic, such as test-driven development, linting, tooling setup, and so forth. Even actually, we're having agile workflow introduction, because I think these are some of the topics that you really don't receive when you're sat learning either by yourself or in bootcamp. We also do a weekly check-in just to check that the students are on track and that they're receiving what they require to continue on their projects themselves. I'm really excited about this project because I think it gives the opportunity for those students to really come in and see what we're about as developer, as an engineering team, and also be able to then take that experience with them when they find their first position. So for me, the benefits of such programs for participants is that exposure, as I mentioned before, for the developer workflows, doing code reviews, doing plannings, being in retros. These were things I had never experienced before I started work. And being able to touch on that beforehand prepared me really well to be able to be an active and a productive team member when I did join. Collaboration with other developers, and also maybe even more importantly, other roles within product development, I think is really important, particularly if you're coming from a different background and you're maybe less aware about the different roles within tech. Introduction to tooling is great. I changed my IDE to match what my partner in Rails Skills was doing. And that allowed me to then be able to not only learn that tooling, but also when I would see her code something, be able to replicate it also on my own machine. And a chance to discover different roles. Again, I would say the most concrete example for this is data science, where it's actually broken down into different roles. And I think until you have that opportunity to see what those roles look like, it's very hard to say which one you actually want to do. I think often you get asked this. I remember I got asked this at the start of like, do you want to do back end? Do you want to do front end? Do you want to do engineer, like data engineering? Which do you want to do? And without that exposure, it's incredibly difficult to make the decision. I would now say with hindsight, like, it doesn't matter because you can change your mind. But at the time, it felt like a very permanent decision. And it gives experience to put on the CV. So for sure, when you're going into any kind of recruitment process, you're trying to stand out. And particularly in a market where there is many people coming out of boot camps and many people learning to code, you really need to find what you can to make yourself stand out from the rest. And it allows participants also to build a network, which is really essential, especially for job finding. Even if the participant might not stay on at the company where they do such a program, it means that they then have contacts in the industry to like continue searching or give a recommendation. And it's not just for the participants, of course not. I think the huge benefits are actually for the companies themselves. So you get to support growing a diverse and fresh applicant pool. You might also find applicants that you want to directly employ. But even if you don't directly employ them, this is a benefit for everybody. You get fresh eyes on your team setup or your product, particularly if they end up then maybe working on part of your product. This is just super invaluable, I think, and very much overlooked of like when someone is new into the team, being able to give feedback on what is working and maybe what isn't working is just something that is very valuable for your team. You're going to support or foster a collaborative culture. So as I mentioned, pairing in general for me has not been such a experience that has happened a lot. And I think that's because there isn't really that culture in the company currently. And I think if you have more junior members, it really starts to foster that. So I think this can be a real benefit of like the person who is putting their hand up and asking for knowledge sharing and asking questions around how things work actually can benefit all of the team members who maybe just don't feel comfortable at that point in asking for such things. And the other big point here is it strengthens mentoring skills of existing developers. Mentorship and communication, I think, are some of the skills that we are more recognizing as being really important, but they certainly are important. And I think they are skills just like any other skills that need to be trained and need to be continuously practiced. So if people have the opportunity to do that mentoring, it will really help them also in their own personal growth, even if they may be a mid-level or a senior level engineer already. Here's some ideas, and these are just ideas. I'm really interested if anybody has any of their own. If you want to set up your own coding program, first of all, think, what do you want to achieve? And then secondly, who do you want to support? I think for me, with this, I really wanted to use this program to support undertapped talent in the industry, because I think diversity and inclusion are incredibly important topics in tech industry. I think the tech industry also has a lot of promise and a lot of resources to be able to actively make a difference. So for me, such a program, and Rails Goals was similar. I chose that we would focus predominantly on like gender minorities. It will be different for wherever you're based or what your company dynamic is. Think about what's going to be involved in terms of like the length and the resources you actually have to do this. So for the Ecosia Summer of Code, we're only doing 6 weeks. That's because we don't have a huge amount of resources. to commit to really give a longer experience for the students. And also on their behalf, it means that they are not tied down for the whole summer. Who in the team is going to lead this, I think is really important. Doesn't have to be a senior engineer. I'm a junior engineer and I'm leading this program myself. But I certainly needed to get buy-in from the rest of the team, and I've needed support from my engineering managers and CTO. And the last thing I would say is make it open source. I think working on open source software is completely underrated. And I wish I'd known more about it before I started Rails Girls. But this is one of my top tips for anybody who is here and is like, I started building my own programs. I've been learning this program now for a year. What should my next step be? Of course, you're going to probably be looking for your first position. But on the side, I would say try and work collaboratively on an open source project. There's so many great ones out there. Find one that is something to do with something that identifies strongly with yourself, or a topic that you're passionate about, and then reach out to the people that are running the program. So the last point on that I'd like to bring up is that in open source, though, there is still a huge gender imbalance. And this is really problematic. It can be very difficult as a gender minority to go into an open source community and start contributing because you may not feel welcome. There's also parts of this study that point out that often pull requests that are marked by outwardly presenting women developers will get less likely to be accepted. And there's even down to the point where there is just abuse within some of the communities. So of course, people need to be careful when they're entering these communities, but also as communities, we need to make sure that we are intentively making sure that we have an open and inclusive environment for people to join. I could do a whole other talk on how to make your open source project more inclusive and open, but I would say this is another one of the reasons why we really need projects like this, because they support people being able to get into the industry, and not only open source, but being able to diversify the applicant pool that is already there. So before I hand over to kind of going through into a more of a Q&A and seeing what thoughts you may have, I just wanted to share with you a few thoughts around how you can support some undertapped talent and technology. First thing is always talk about it. If you're working in a company where diversity and inclusion is not yet discussed, maybe just start bringing it up and sharing some articles with your peers. Of course, only if you feel comfortable and safe enough to do so. But I think it's often something that is just kind of accepted as something that may be happening, but not actually at the forefront of discussion. Support some existing programs, such as Outreachy, which is a program actually quite similar to Rails Girls Summer of Code, and you can support them either through mentorship or sponsorship. There's also the BPocket space and the Global Fund for Women, who are both focused on supporting underrepresented groups in technology. And support local communities. Of course, this is, again, even different in this time that we're talking, as we can see, I'm talking with Caitlin in Toronto. Actually, maybe the local part of this is less relevant. But you can certainly offer hosting, be that in an office or online with Zoom. Sponsorship is always welcome, and mentorship as well. Again, it can be mutually beneficial. I would really actively encourage any developers to join mentoring programs. Mentoring is a skill, so don't go into it thinking that you won't learn something too, and you may learn and need to adapt. But I can really recommend these two resources for getting more involved with that. And maybe think about starting your own in-house program. So I think this is something that we need to kind of take on our shoulders in companies rather than leaving it to the community. With the closure of Rails Girls, I can only say that I think this is kind of one of the things where these important topics get left to the community, and they are a lot of work and they need a lot of resources. So I think companies need to step up to support that, because ultimately the industry is gaining from these kind of programs. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for listening to the presentation part. And I'm really looking forward to having a bit more of a discussion around what everyone's thoughts are on this.
Thank you so much, Jessica. This was absolutely fantastic. A lot of fantastic information here. And again, these resources will be shared with everyone afterwards as well. As you're presenting, you can almost see the people's heads nodding, honestly. People are sharing a lot of their own experience and sharing, but also kind of nodding their head saying, yes, it's the experience of coding. One person noted, not the experience of just earning money. And then how do we showcase that on your resume? Exactly. So this is really great. A lot of people, this is their first initial webinar as well. So in the open source and wanting to know how to start that community and understanding of how to join that community as well. So I think you touched on a lot of really important points here. Could you back up just a little bit? What does Ecosia actually do?
Ecosia actually is a search engine. And the difference between us and other search engines that people may be familiar with using is that we use all of the profits for planting trees around the world. And we're also involved in a lot of different initiatives towards promoting more sustainable lifestyles, and also various tree planting, but also regenerative agriculture programs.
Wonderful. Wonderful. That's great. A lot of great advice too around, again, your resume building, but also keeping your community safe. The experience of the Summer of Code team, are you able to speak to that a little bit more, and the importance of the team around that?
Yeah, do you mean in my experience as Rails Girls or the program at Ecosia?
With Rails Girls, but I also wouldn't mind if you would go a little deeper into, because I understand that program at Ecosia just started up this week. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So it might be a little bit early to.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think with Rails Girls, the big thing with Rails Girls is also the application process is incredibly beneficial too. So even when you get to the point where you may or may not have received the scholarship, you've already actually learned a lot. So they really encourage you to already get involved with open source very early on. And they also kind of have encouraged you to get coaches and to meet with those coaches, to find a teammate who you will start pairing with. And also through the application process, you've already kind of created a lot of the kind of bio and information that you would then probably need to use to apply elsewhere. So I think that's actually a real great plus. And hopefully a lot of the people that applied this year, but unfortunately were not able to do the program, can take that away with them. For instance, one of the teams that I was supporting through the application process, I mean, they were having multiple PRs merged into the project and a fluid conversation with the owner of the open source project. So I think that's also already really beneficial. The team aspect is something that at first I had difficulty with because I didn't know anyone at the time who was in a similar position to me. And I met my partner actually through Slack, through one of the local communities. And I kind of felt like that could be really hit or miss. But I think it was super beneficial because having someone else who's kind of exactly at the stage that you're at to talk through things with really, really helps. Because even someone like, even myself, now that I have been a developer for a period of time, it's easy for me to forget how it was when I was starting out. And I don't fully forget, but like when I talk to people and they're telling me about the concerns and the fears that they have going through this application process of trying to bridge that gap between being someone who's learning to program and someone who has that as a job. It's really humbling, because I think, like I say, once you're in there and once you have a developer job, and let's be fair, a developer wage, it's very easy to kind of forget how that experience has been. So having someone that you can talk to about that, who really is in there with you, is super beneficial. And then also being able to pair program with someone, I think really helps you become better at breaking down what code is doing, and how to problem solve. So I think the being in a team is like really crucial, actually.
Fantastic. Would you mind speaking a bit more about how working with open source software specifically translated into working in your first full engineering role?
Yeah. So I think the difference for me between before I worked on open source, and after, was I had worked on a project collaboratively, which might sound like a small thing, but I think that makes a huge difference. And not only collaboratively, but collaboratively with like a larger team and a group of people that I like did not know on a personal level. So in a professional environment where you really, like, communication is key, and processes are very important. So doing pull requests, doing code reviews, making sure that you have tests in your code. We all have tests in our code, but sometimes for side projects, they come later. And I think that accountability is really good, because that's what it's going to be like when you're working in a company, hopefully. And I think that really got me in the mindset for when I went for my first interview, to be able to talk on the same level with the people who were interviewing me and understand what they wanted or expected from me, because I'd seen how a project could run. I think open source is a great way of doing it. I mean, open source is just something that is fantastic anyway, regardless of the topic we're discussing today. But I think doing it in open source also kind of helps you build network. It helps you have visibility on the coding that you're doing as well. And I think it helps you also meet people who are like-minded to you, particularly if you can work on a project that is maybe within your interest range. I think this is, yeah. I remember we went to the Nextcloud conference during the application process, and just kind of getting to meet everyone that worked on this project was like somewhat surreal, because I think before that I'd just been like writing my own scripts. So meeting all these people who contributed to the project. Some of them were like employed by Nextcloud, but the vast majority were actually contributors who did it in their free time. So it was super interesting. And I definitely agree. Yeah, it shouldn't probably be a project from an individual. Although maybe working with another individual can be helpful for learning specifics. I think what I'm talking about here is really working with a project that has numerous contributors, and maybe from like different parts of the world.
Great. Any last final questions here for Jessica? Just a lot of nodding heads. I think you really touched on a lot of great points here. Well, Jessica, thanks again. A lot of fantastic information, and we really appreciate you donating your time. It looks like we've answered all the questions today. If there are any more, please feel free to reach out to myself. I can pass questions along and start kind of that engaging conversation again. Again, I will be sending out the presentation slides, the recording, and contact information for myself for any of those follow-up questions. So if that is all, thank you for your participation, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day.
If I could give a quick shout out, I'd just like to say, like publicly, a big thanks to Bill Kennedy who's in the call, because he's been doing something awesome of like tweeting out that he'll help people with their CVs writing. And I think that is like no small thing, because it's a huge amount of work to look through people's CVs. But offering that kind of support to people who are new in the industry is just like amazing. And if there is any way that you can think to do that, to like
Yep.
help in that kind of way, I think it's really, really powerful. And I mean, I know a few of the people in the call, and I really admire all of the work that they're doing to support the community. And I think it needs to not be the usual suspects. We need to find a way of like redefining maybe what junior engineer is, and also thinking about maybe if that's not an entry level position, what else can be there in companies and where that value is, and promoting it so that that starts to become a standard. Because I really just don't see how we can continue in this route of like just looking for senior engineers, because yeah, they're going to run out at some point. So.
Okay, great. Bill, I may reach out to you as well to see if I can add your contact information perhaps in the email. So if there are people that are interested, we can definitely get you in touch with them. Thank you again, Jessica. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks very much.